It was supposed to be the happiest day of my son's life, but it became the most shocking night of mine. In front of our entire family, my husband stood up and said the words that froze the room. I found someone new, but he had no idea that I was ready for this moment. When I handed him that small envelope before leaving, what he saw inside made him scream. The ballroom was glowing that night. Crystal chandeliers shimmered like tiny suns, and every face was lit with joy. It was my son's wedding, a day I had dreamed of since he was a little boy. The air smelled of roses, champagne, and new beginnings. Laughter bounced from table to table. Guests raised glasses, cameras flashed. And there I sat, proud, calm, thinking life had finally given me peace. My husband, Richard, sat beside me. We had been married 32 years, 3 decades of birthdays, tears, and holidays, 3 decades of building a home together. That night, I wore a deep blue gown. Richard had once said it was his favorite color. Funny how memories can twist like glass, sharp, fragile, and ready to cut. The music softened as our son and his bride took the floor. They danced slowly, lost in their own universe. Everyone clapped, recording the moment. I smiled, thinking, this is what love looks like. Then, the microphone squealed. The band stopped. Richard stood up. At first, I thought he wanted to give a toast, the Father's blessing, a few warm words. But the look in his eyes wasn't joy. It was something else, rehearsed, cold, deliberate. He cleared his throat. The crowd fell silent. Before we continue, he said, I need to say something personal. My heart tightened. He looked at me, not with love, not with guilt, but with relief. This is the end for us, he said plainly. I found someone new. Gasps rippled across the room. Someone dropped a fork. The bride's mother whispered, Oh my God. For a second I couldn't breathe. The chandeliers blurred. Every sound turned into a distant echo. Across from me, a woman sat, younger, dressed in red, smiling like she'd already won. Richard's hand brushed hers under the table. And that's when I understood. He hadn't chosen this moment by accident. He wanted an audience. He wanted control. My son looked torn between rage and disbelief. His new wife clutched his arm. Mom, he whispered. But I raised a hand to stop him. Not yet. Not here. I forced a smile, the kind that hides storms. Thanks for the heads up, I said softly. A few people laughed, nervously, not sure if they should. Richard blinked, surprised by my calm. Inside, my heart was a battlefield. Years of loyalty, patience, and silence collapsed all at once. But I had learned something long ago. Never fight fire with noise. Fight it with quiet. The rest of dinner passed in awkward fragments. The band tried to play again. People whispered behind napkins. Richard avoided my eyes. When dessert arrived, I stood up. My chair scraped against marble. The sound echoed like thunder. I think I'll be leaving, I said. Congratulations, my love, I told my son, kissing his forehead. Then I turned to Richard. You'll need this. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small white envelope. His name was written neatly across it. He frowned. What is this? Just a little something, I said, and handed it to him. He looked down at the envelope, confused. The room watched silently. I gave him one last smile, not bitter, not broken, just done. Then I walked out. Every step echoed like a drumbeat. My heels clicked against the marble floor, strong, steady, final. Behind me, I heard murmurs, then a sudden sharp gasp. Richard had opened the envelope, and what he saw inside made him scream. Fade to black. Music swells. to be continued. The doors of the ballroom closed behind me. The music had stopped, but the echo of his scream still followed me into the hallway. I didn't look back, not once. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp, the kind that feels like truth after too many lies. I walked toward the parking lot, my heart beating like a drum inside my ribs. Inside that envelope was not just paper. It was years of silence, years of pretending everything was fine. And tonight, I had ended it. But let's go back. Because that envelope, that one simple thing, was months in the making. It started when I found a message. One small message that shattered everything. Dinner again tomorrow? Signed with a heart. At first, I wanted to believe it was innocent. A colleague, a friend, maybe an old schoolmate. But deep down, my instincts whispered, no, it was more. I started watching, quietly, patiently. Every night he came home a little later, his excuses, longer, his eyes, distant. And his cologne, not the same one I'd bought him. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I began to build my own story, the truth I could hold in my hands, receipts, photos, emails, every lie printed in black and white. The day my son got engaged, I already knew. Richard was seeing her, the woman in red. He thought I would never find out. He thought he still controlled the narrative, but he didn't realize I'd been quietly reclaiming it all. Back at the wedding, as I walked out, the guests whispered. Some pitied me, some judged, but I didn't care, because I knew what was inside that envelope. It wasn't anger, it wasn't revenge, it was justice. Inside were bank statements, proof of his hidden accounts, and documents transferring our joint assets entirely into my name. The night before, I had visited my lawyer. Every signature, every page, legal, sealed, complete. If he wanted a new life, he'd start it from zero. And that wasn't all. There was a photo, him and his mistress at a hotel, the same weekend he'd told me he was visiting his mother. And beneath it, a note, 5 words written in red ink. Thank you for setting me free. As I drove away, city lights blurred into streaks of gold. My hands trembled, not from sadness, but from release. 32 years of being the quiet one. 32 years of cooking, forgiving, waiting, gone. That night I checked into a small seaside inn. I turned off my phone. The silence felt heavy, but pure. I stood by the window watching the tide roll in. The sea didn't ask questions. It just moved, forward, endlessly. Somewhere behind me, my husband was unraveling. I imagined his face as he read the words, as he realized the empire he built on lies had collapsed in his own hands. And yet, I didn't hate him, not anymore, because hate ties you to the person who hurt you, and I was done being tied. Morning came softly with pale sunlight slipping through the curtains. For the first time in years, I woke without fear. I ordered breakfast, black coffee and strawberries. Simple, free. When I opened my phone, it was flooded with missed calls. My son, my sister, even Richard. I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and began typing a letter. Not to him, to myself. It started with the words, Dear me, you did not lose anything tonight. You found yourself, tears blurred my vision, not from pain, but from recognition. Because somewhere between betrayal and freedom, I had discovered my strength again. Later that day, I received a message from my son. It said only one line. Mom, I'm proud of you. That was all I needed. The story of my marriage had ended, but my story of the real one had just begun. Fade out. Soft piano music, to be continued. The words lingered on my phone screen, glowing softly in the morning light. Mom, I'm proud of you." For the first time in a long while, I smiled. A real smile. Not the polite kind I'd worn for years, but one that came from somewhere deep and honest. I closed my laptop and looked out at the sea again. The waves were calm, as if they already knew my story had turned a corner, but peace, as I've learned, is always tested. Because just when I thought it was over, there was a knock on my hotel door. 3 sharp knocks. Steady, familiar. I froze. My hands went cold. Then his voice. "Margaret, it's me. Please, open the door, Richard." For a few seconds I just stood there, heart racing, breath caught in my throat. I hadn't seen him since that night. Part of me wanted to ignore him. Another part wanted to see what he looked like now, after losing everything he took for granted. I opened the door, slowly. He looked different. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes red, and his voice cracked as he spoke. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside silently. He entered, glancing around the small room like he couldn't believe I had left the mansion we once shared. "Margaret," he began, "I don't know what that envelope was, but you made a huge mistake." I laughed, a quiet, broken laugh that startled even me. "A mistake?" I said. "Richard, the only mistake I made was trusting you for too long." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "That envelope," I said, "was every lie you ever told, in black and white." He tried to defend himself. "It wasn't what you think, she—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't insult both of us with excuses." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Only the sound of the waves filled the silence. Then he said something that almost made me pity him. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," he whispered. "At the wedding, I panicked. I thought you'd be angry, not prepared," I said softly. He nodded, ashamed. "I've lost everything," he said finally. "My accounts, my job, even her. She left when she realized I had nothing." He sat on the edge of the bed, defeated. The man who once stood tall and arrogant now looked like a shadow of himself. I watched him for a long moment. Once, that sight would have broken me. Now it just reminded me of how far I'd come. "I don't hate you, Richard," I said quietly. He looked up, startled. "I should, but I don't. Because hating you means I'm still giving you space in my heart, and I've already reclaimed it." He stared at me like he didn't understand. Maybe he never would. I walked to the window and opened it. The morning breeze filled the room, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. "You always said I was too quiet," I said. "You mistook peace for weakness." He tried to speak again, but I raised a hand. "I'm done explaining myself to people who don't listen." He stood, his voice trembling. "Is this really it, Margaret? After everything?" I turned to face him, calm, steady, certain. "Yes," I said. "This is it." He looked at me for a long time, as if waiting for me to take it back, but I didn't. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. "Good," I replied. "Then let that be the last thing between us." He walked to the door, hesitated, then turned one last time. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought you had it in you." I smiled faintly. "That's because you never really saw me." He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I stood there in silence. Then I exhaled, a long, deep breath that felt like years leaving my body. The next few days were quiet. I moved into a small apartment near the ocean. My son and his wife visited often. We cooked together, laughed, rebuilt something real. Sometimes at night I still thought about the wedding, the chandeliers, the whispers, the envelope. But now it felt distant, like a scene from a movie that had finally ended. I began writing again, something I hadn't done in years, a story about a woman who learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just whispers, enough. One evening as the sun dipped low, I received a letter, no name, just a return address I recognized instantly, Richard's handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single page, no apology, just 5 words. You were right. Goodbye forever. I stared at it for a while, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. Some chapters don't deserve rereading. I poured myself a cup of tea, walked to the balcony, and watched the horizon glow gold. For the first time, the world felt wide open, like anything was possible again. Fade out. Soft music builds. To be continued. The sea was calm that evening. Waves whispered softly against the rocks, like the ocean was telling me, you made it. I leaned on the balcony railing, a cup of tea warm in my hands. The letter from Richard sat folded in the drawer behind me, silent, like the past should be. I didn't cry, not anymore. The woman who once cried herself to sleep was gone. She had vanished somewhere between heartbreak and healing. Now, there was just me, whole, scarred, stronger. The next morning I woke before sunrise. I watched the light crawl slowly over the horizon, turning the dark sky into gold. For the first time in decades, I felt excited for a new day. No duties, no expectations, just possibility. I opened my old journal, the one I'd hidden away for years. Between faded pages were dreams I had long forgotten. Painting, traveling, teaching, all the things I'd once loved before I became someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's shadow. I smiled. It was time to find that woman again. The first step was small. I signed up for an art class at the local community center. When I walked into that room, I felt a strange mix of nerves and joy. The smell of paint, the sound of brushes scratching against canvas, the laughter of strangers. It all felt alive. The instructor, a kind woman named Grace, handed me a blank canvas and said, "Don't think, just start." And I did. At first it was just colors, blue, white, gray, the colors of the sea outside my window. But slowly shapes began to form. Waves, light, a woman standing on the shore. When I finished, Grace looked at it for a long time. Then she said softly, "She looks free." I smiled. She is. Days turned into weeks. Every morning I painted. Every evening I walked by the sea. The noise in my head grew quieter. The pain that once filled every corner of my life now became just background, a whisper I could live with. I learned to enjoy the silence again. No phone buzzing, no tension in the air, no pretending, just peace. One afternoon, while painting by the window, my son came to visit. He knocked softly, then stepped inside with a smile. "Mom," he said, "you seem different." "I am," I replied simply. He looked around at the paintings covering the walls. "This place feels like you," he said. We sat together, talking about his new life, his plans, his dreams. Before he left, he hugged me tightly and whispered, "Dad doesn't deserve to know this version of you." I smiled. "He doesn't have to," I said. "This version is mine." That night, I walked along the shoreline barefoot, letting the cool water touch my feet. Above me, the stars looked endless. Each one felt like a promise, a reminder that even after the darkest nights, light always returns. I thought about everything that had happened, the wedding, the envelope, the confrontation. It felt like another lifetime. Pain had been my teacher, silence had been my friend, and peace had been my reward. A few weeks later, Grace approached me after class. "We're hosting an art exhibit," she said. "You should display one of your pieces." I hesitated. It had been years since I'd stood in front of strangers like that. But then I remembered the woman I used to be, afraid, quiet, invisible, and I decided she didn't live here anymore. "Okay," I said. "I'll do it." The night of the exhibit was magical. Soft lights, gentle music, people admiring the art around the gallery. When they reached my painting, they paused. It showed a woman standing by the ocean, arms open, eyes closed, letting the wind lift her hair. Someone asked, "What's it called?" I answered softly, "Freedom." The word hung in the air like music. Later that night, a local journalist approached me for an interview. They asked, "What inspired your work?" I smiled. "Life," I said. "Pain, growth, and the decision to start over." When I returned home that night, I placed the small golden name tag from the exhibit on my shelf beside the folded letter, not as a trophy, but as proof that endings can also be beginnings. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't broken. She was brave. And for the first time in my entire life, I whispered to my reflection, "I'm proud of you." The next morning I woke up smiling. No reason, just gratitude. Gratitude for the hurt that taught me wisdom, for the betrayal that pushed me to rediscover myself, and for the courage that brought me here. To this quiet, beautiful moment. The world outside was bright again, and so was I, fade out. Soft piano music, to be continued. Morning sunlight poured through the window, spilling gold across the floorboards of my small apartment. The sea outside glimmered softly, as if the world itself was applauding my survival. I stood there quietly, holding a cup of coffee, listening to the sound of waves rolling in and out. It was the same rhythm that had guided me through everything. Rise, fall, rise again. That rhythm had become my heartbeat. Life after pain isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent, gentle, like learning to walk again after forgetting how. Every morning, I practiced peace. I watered my plants, opened the windows, and reminded myself that the air outside was mine to breathe. There was no husband beside me anymore, no heavy silence at the breakfast table. Just me, and the quiet hum of a new beginning. And you know what? That was enough. I started volunteering at the art center, helping children paint, teaching them how colors can tell stories even when words can't. One little girl named Lucy asked me once, "Miss Margaret, how do you paint something sad?" I smiled and told her, "You don't. You paint something true. And sometimes truth looks sad, but that's how you heal it." She nodded thoughtfully, then painted a small sun behind her storm clouds. That's when I realized we all carry storms, but even storms have light somewhere inside them. Days turned into weeks, weeks into seasons. Each one brought a little more peace. I stopped checking social media, stopped wondering what Richard was doing, stopped trying to measure my life against anyone else's. I learned that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about remembering without pain. One afternoon, while cleaning the shelf, I found the old envelope, the one that had started everything. I turned it over in my hands. The paper had softened with time. The ink had faded slightly. I smiled and whispered, "You did your job." Then I walked to the balcony, held it over the railing, and let the wind take it. The envelope twirled in the air like a bird set free until it disappeared into the endless blue. That night, I wrote again in my journal, not about him, not about pain, but about becoming. I wrote, "Healing isn't loud. It's the quiet choice to keep going." And underneath that, another line, "Sometimes you lose people, but find yourself." When I closed the notebook, I felt light, as if a lifetime of weight had finally lifted off my shoulders. A few weeks later, Grace announced another art show. This time, she asked if I would speak. "Tell them about your journey," she said. So I did. The gallery lights were soft, and faces looked up at me with quiet curiosity. My hands trembled at first, but my voice was steady. I told them how pain can destroy, but it can also rebuild. How endings can break you open only to show you what was always inside. I told them that courage doesn't mean not falling. It means standing up even when your knees still shake. People listened. Some cried. Some smiled through tears. When it was over, they applauded softly. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just telling my story. I was helping others tell theirs too. After the event, Lucy ran up to me again. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "When I grow up, I want to be like you." I bent down and smiled. "No, sweetheart," I said. "Be like you." That's even better. Later that evening, I walked home alone, but it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace, the kind that hums quietly in your chest when you know you're okay. The city lights shimmered on the horizon. Every window glowed with life. Every face I passed seemed like a story waiting to be told. And I thought, maybe that's what life is. A series of stories we write and rewrite until we finally recognize the main character we were always meant to be. When I reached home, I poured myself a glass of wine, lit a candle, and played soft music in the background. I looked around my apartment at the canvases, the books, the plants, the quiet joy that now lived in these walls. And I realized something simple yet powerful. I hadn't just survived. I had started over. I sat down at my desk, took out one last blank page, and wrote the closing line of my story. She walked through fire and came out made of light. I closed the notebook slowly, feeling the warmth of the candle flicker on my face. The screen fades to black. Soft piano plays. My voice returns one last time, calm, reflective, strong. If you're watching this and you've been broken, I want you to remember this. You're not defined by who left you. You're defined by how you rise. The music swells gently. So stand tall. Smile again. Start again. Because the best chapters of your life are still unwritten. The final frame appears on screen. The end. Or maybe your beginning. Fade out. Silence. Then the soft sound of waves. Steady. Eternal. And free.